Hello and welcome to today's podcast. Today I would like to talk about movie sequels. I'm joined by a guest today.
Hi.
Yeah, we already recorded that, and then I realized I didn't record his audio because, yeah, I didn't look before. So right now everything should be working and we can start. So, generally speaking, when talking about movie sequels, I would like to, or we would like to differentiate between series of films, which, for example, would be something like Harry Potter, where like the second or third movie isn't really a sequel to the first one because they work in a way that they all make sense together. Um, for example, for a movie sequel, which we'll also talk later about, would be John Wick, where the first one is a movie that could be standing for itself, and the second part and the third part are sequels to the first one. Yeah, I would start by talking about movie sequels in general, and I would start there with good sequels. So obviously, talking about movie sequels in general, a movie sequel is a continuation to the first movie or the first franchise that was the movie about. Um, and a good example for that would, as I already mentioned, be John Wick. Not just because it's for me personally, many people consider John Wick 2 a successful series of films, I would say even now, when talking about them together. But just talking about the second and third episode of John Wick, those were good sequels to the first movie. In first place, not just because the action is overall made well, but because the movie gives the audience what they want. It was built about a character in the center of the plot, which in this case is John Wick, and as long as people do that, they like it. And even though the plot is always about revenge and always about fighting, I would say it's a successful sequel. What would you say?
Yeah, I can definitely agree on that. So far I've only seen the first and the second part,
Hmm.
but I definitely want to watch the third part, which I think kind of speaks for the movie series or the sequels.
Hmm.
Um, Also, I feel like in general the movie idea, first and second part, is kind of similar. Yeah, like you said,
Hmm.
revenge,
Yeah.
but it's kind of made in a different way.
Hmm.
um, which kind of just freshens it up a little bit and also goes deeper into John Wick as a character, which I liked.
Yeah.
So it didn't really feel like the first movie made over again, which
Yeah.
was very good.
Yeah. 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 Obviously. Yeah. So as a good example, I think John Wick is something that most people would agree on. He already mentioned it, when the plot is basically the same, and that's something where I would like to talk in the category of unnecessary prequels, sorry, sequels, and that's I think a good example for that is the Mission Impossible row, and there the movies are always built the same, always about the same character, which is like we said at John Wick, not something too bad, but it doesn't really feel like these movies add up to each other. They are just always about a mission, obviously, and he has to kill people, he has to fight. There's always somebody who threatens the world, and it just always goes the same. I've only watched two of the, I think, five movies are
Six.
there, six movies, and I feel like I've watched the same movie in different locations and with a different enemy, which is not something I would say is bad because the audience and the fans of the franchise still like it. That's why there are even six movies existing, and I think they are planning on doing another one, if I'm not mistaken. And but the question I want to ask myself or ask us is that at what point is it still necessary to make sequels if it is just for the money? Like a good example for that would be the Joker thing, because many people think that the movie itself is good and it doesn't really need another part because then it could be backfiring to the first part or something wouldn't make sense, like a lot of problems sequels in general have. And this is something a lot of people think could be a dangerous thing when talking about sequels.
Yeah. Well, I think the Mission Impossible thing is, I personally don't really get it. I haven't seen the movies and I don't plan on
Mm,
watching them.
yeah.
Um, but a well, I think that the people just want to see action, fights, and explosions,
Mm,
and the more movies they make, the newer the production date kind of, or more or less, get,
yes.
and the more effects you can use, and the more uh, yeah, dramatic and more realistic in a way, I think
Mm.
it gets, which might be the
Yeah, the main point. Why?
reason
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
6 movies.
Mm,
Um, but yeah, like movies like Joker, I personally didn't really like it that much.
mm.
Um, but I can definitely see why people like it, and I think it definitely has like a more or less
Purpose.
important role.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
purpose, right? Um, to more or less explain the Joker, because he just kind of appeared in
Yeah.
Batman, which I
Yeah.
I personally didn't think it was bad.
Yeah.
He was just there, kind of like every Batman
Villain.
villain,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
it was a, or I think definitely a good idea to
Mhm.
make a movie about the Joker,
Yeah.
especially because the Joker as a character has a lot of, or a
Yeah.
pretty big fan.
Yeah. Yeah. And always a lot of potential, of course,
Yeah,
when
definitely. Yeah.
you have all the comics, you have all even fan-made stuff. So there is a lot of things that movie writers can come back to if they are having a lack of ideas, which is probably not very likely to happen because I think it has a lot of potential into every direction with the Joker. And yeah, so these are the ones that are questionable, where I would say it's pretty hard to say if a movie sequel is necessary, if a movie sequel is well planned, and yeah, which leads us to the bad sequels, where I would like, before talking about Star Wars, which obviously has a whole trilogy of sequels now, and Indiana Jones. So this is the one where it started out good, and the first two or three movies were made exceptionally well. I loved all of them, and I think most of the people did. And then with the last one, with the Crystal Head, with the aliens appearing, a lot of people didn't really like that. And I can get why, because it was, I think, not so good written like the ones before. The main villain was considered boring or not really realistic, and it was a little bit, yeah, a little bit fucked up to say the least. And I get it, even though I didn't really mind watching it as a kid, and well, as a younger person, and I think it was alright. A lot of people didn't really enjoy watching it, and I think that's where they brought this series to an end, where everybody could say at least that it's not fully hated. So maybe like the whole Indiana Jones series is considered to be a good one. Then there's always people yelling and complaining about the last one, but that's it. So overall, they're in a pretty good spot. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if you would probably agree on that, because that's generally speaking.
Yeah, as far as I know, or yeah, as far as I know, I'm not really into Indiana Jones that
Mm,
much. But yeah, I can, on
yeah.
my knowledge, which is very limited, I can definitely agree on that.
Okay, yeah, yeah. And then there's obviously the big point and the big problem that I think has um, sequels been going into a certain spot, which is obviously Star Wars. And I can totally see why, because Disney bought Star Wars, bought the whole franchise, and I don't know like how long they've waited, but it was safe to say that from the beginning on, everybody knew that there would be a new trilogy. So it's hard to say what they could have done better in first place, but to say the least, the last three movies are not considered as good as obviously the fourth to the sixth and not even the first to the third. And that's something where I begin to think of the prequels. Because the prequels, when they came out back then, they were not considered to be a part of the Star Wars universe as well. Not just because a lot of people don't like the idea of expanding that universe in general, but of the lack of storytelling, the characters, the character development, a lot of that. And but right now, I would say the prequels are considered to be Star Wars, just like the fourth, fifth, and sixth part. And I think I would agree on that, even though I never really hated them that much because I grew up watching all six of them. But the people that grew up watching only the original trilogy didn't like that as much. And I can kind of see a pattern there where we, who grew up with the like first six movies, now think that the seventh to ninth is not really a part of Star Wars. And the question like I'm asking myself is, I would like you to answer is that would you say that maybe in a few years, in 10 years, 20 years, I'm not too sure, do you think that the new sequels will be considered Star Wars, or do you think it will stay the same like now?
Well, you had a very good point, I think, with us growing up with 1 to 6 as Star Wars.
Mm,
And that might also change, like in whatever 10 years when people watch Star Wars, or then like I don't know, 10, 12-year olds will watch Star Wars. They'll have 9 movies as Star Wars
yeah,
when they get to know it, which I think then they will or should probably just consider that as Star Wars.
mm,
Um, but I think that the difficult part is that the 1 to 3 are explaining a pre-made character. You
mhm,
had specific points you had to talk about, and it was really that much room for change in the characters,
yes,
um, because it had to come to a certain conclusion, which was set before the movies.
yes,
Um, and they don't have that with 7 to 9, obviously,
mm,
and they, in a way, I don't know, kind of, yeah, messed up, like I said,
yeah.
um, which was too bad, I think.
Yeah, which we probably agree on is the part where most of the fans didn't really like it,
Yeah,
and that's something you say is quite a good idea. Why I think that episode 8 was highly discussed because episode 7 is basically a remake. Of episode 4, we again get introduced to a character on a desert planet. Then there is this bad guy with a mask, and so on. So this is
yeah,
pretty basic, and I think like mega fan or a new one coming into Star Wars, everybody considered the seventh episode to be alright. So
yeah, definitely. But it's just
probably
like
yeah.
more and better effects. I think
Mm.
that's pretty much it.
Yeah, that's obviously what made the movie way more enjoyable than just the plot, and because that was basically recycled.
Yeah, definitely.
And then where the eighth episode came in, that was obviously the part where it started to get a little bit more complicated. Because then we get to know, for example, Luke Skywalker, who was a character that was in well, obviously in the fourth to sixth, also in the third, like as a baby, but that doesn't really matter. Who had a certain personality where he is this hopeful, optimistic, and good shining guy. And then in the eighth episode, we get to know him as somebody who wanted to kill his nephew, somebody who has lost all hope and goes to an island to die. And that's, I think, where a lot of the Star Wars fans and a lot of fans that have taken these characters into their heart were very disappointed. And that's where I think the eighth episode um, had main issues with, like certain characters being out of role, comparing them to what they used to be. And this is
Yeah,
where the main problem started. And then this is why the ninth episode went back and portraying these characters exactly like people, at least most of them who complained, wanted them to be. And this is why we have at the end a messed up trilogy where like nothing fits to each other. And when you watch these three movies, at the end you are a little bit confused because most of the characters do things that doesn't really make sense. And it's obviously something that ruins the trilogy as a whole. Because when talking about sequels and when watching especially the eighth movie as its own, it's actually the thing that was being right because a sequel shouldn't be about the same thing happening over and over again. And they actually changed something. They changed the characters into a different direction, which we haven't really seen before. They took off the main villain, which nobody expected so easily. They put on character development on certain characters. They are not just evil and mad. They actually have an inner conflict, and this is what a lot of people liked about the movie, me including. But then on the other side, you have characters being out of role and like having no direct connection to the movies before. And this is where the whole thing started to be controversial.
Yeah. Also, I think you can really tell that they had two different producers in the
Mm,
first and or seventh and eighth movie
yeah.
because they just had different ideas of Star Wars.
Mm,
J.J. Abrams obviously didn't, or it feels like he doesn't really know Star Wars that much or whatever. He
mm,
just saw the movies and thought, well, what can I do? Just kind of remake the fourth
yes.
movie, a little bit of the sixth movie, just to make it, I don't know, a little bit not exactly the movie. And Ryan Johnson just had a completely different approach, I think,
Yes. Yes.
um, which I also kind of didn't really mind.
Mm,
Um, but then the ninth movie just kind of shut everything down
yes.
and just, I don't know, took everything and said, no, that's done, that's done, that's done,
yes.
which was too bad, I think.
Yeah. And this is the main problem, of course, because when you see these movies just being made like the way the fans wanted, that can lead up to a pretty boring conclusion. Because they just thought we get the main villain that everyone likes, we put in the main characters that everybody likes, we do as much fighting that everyone likes, like everyone obviously being a Star Wars fan, which I don't mind too. I really liked having a lot of lightsaber fights in the last episode, and I think there were a lot of things they could have done right, but the overall story and plot and the overall thing of being not being creative and even more than in episode 4 basically remaking scenes is just something where I would say then you should just stop doing sequels if you're not sure what you want to do, because at the beginning they wanted to do like each movie should have a different producer. That was the
Yeah,
original plan. So you had J.J. Abrams, which I think honestly he did a great job because he put everyone into a boat where everybody agreed that the seventh one was fine, and then it was open to a new thing. And even though Ryan Johnson tried these new things, you could clearly see that the community didn't like it. And
yeah,
then you obviously had to go back and then do all the things you did in the seventh movie and the ninth again, but adding a lot of unlogical consequences because the eighth one was from a different producer. And I think each of these could have done a good trilogy by themselves if they made every movie, but the way that it worked out now is just a disaster. And that's what ruined this trilogy, not just for me and you, but for a lot of people.
yeah. I think so too. It's just that they kind of took the approach with the seventh movie just to kind of, I guess half the movie was basic introduction to the new characters,
Hmm.
which was good,
Yeah.
and then the rest of the movie was just kind of a remake of the
Yeah.
fourth and sixth episode,
Mm.
which, like I said, I didn't mind. Was a good movie.
Yeah.
Then the eighth movie just had was controversial,
Mm.
and Disney didn't like it because they had I don't know. I guess they just got cold feet or something.
Yeah.
Um, and had to just get J.J. Abrams again, which I think was a big mistake.
Yeah.
And then I just kind of Reddit theories and said, I
Yeah.
take that and that, and
Yeah,
half
it
the
really
movie.
feels like that, unfortunately.
Yeah, also with don't want to or don't need to spoil it, but yeah,
Yeah.
it just was. I think
just the outcome is
yeah,
it's not too much of an
it's not really
surprise, or
rewarding.
not
I think
even, yeah, it's not really something where you would say I consider this a new or at least creative conclusion. It was just and then even some other things which we don't want to talk about because obviously that would be spoiling. Yeah, so in conclusion, I would like to share my opinion about sequels, and after that you can obviously say yours. Um, I would say that a sequel needs to like at least fulfill two or three categories. Which one is obviously, even though it's not probably a nice thing to hear, it has to make enough money. Because if it doesn't, then obviously you can't continue it because making these movies is very expensive. The second one is that people need to watch it, and the third one is that people need to like it. And I think when at least two of these three categories are fulfilled, then why not? Because even though the money thing could be a little complicated, if people watch it and people like it, and you like get a little bit, not all of the money back, then you could still say like we sell the franchise, we sell certain toys, I don't know, we could bring it to Amazon, to Netflix, like whatever. It's just some ways to make more money of it, and I think people would support it because if they watch it and they like it, um, people tend to uh, spend money on it. It was the
yeah,
same thing with a few TV series that was cancelled, where people made. I don't know if you know the TV series Lucifer, but
yeah,
originally they didn't want to continue it after the third season because like Amazon didn't want to spend any money on it, and then they like sent then the fans supported it, and somehow it got saved by Netflix because the fans begged for it so much. And but that's something I think is beautiful because there you see, even when the money category is not there, you can still see that people would like to watch it and people would like to care about it, and then the show can go on.
yeah.
Like,
That's the same thing
yeah,
with, I don't know if you've seen that, The Expanse,
The Expanse.
uh,
No, I haven't.
which is a Amazon series
Okay.
now,
Hmm.
because they wanted to or didn't want to continue it, and then people got to Amazon, and Amazon
Ah, okay.
took
Yeah.
over the series and now
Yeah. Yeah.
continues it,
Yeah.
which is also great, I
Yeah,
think.
I think this is awesome when the community can have this much of an impact on a whole franchise. This is awesome. And basically, if like I said, two of these three categories are fulfilled, then I think even if not, I think sequels, even bad sequels, have a right to exist. But I think if two of these three things are fulfilled, they are successful sequels. And I think the general idea of a sequel is beautiful and very nice because if the whole franchise has a lot of people that like and love it, why not more? So this is just a good idea, and same goes for prequels, obviously. And but there, I think it's a lot like you've said at the beginning, because they can't really change that much. It doesn't really have to be a new approach because it's just something that adds up to the main story. Yeah, sequels are a great thing.
Yeah, well, in a way, I think yeah, sequels are good. I was really excited for Star Wars, for example, for the new
Mm,
trilogy. Um, but I think just like movie makers need to be a little bit aware of not ruining the whole movie series.
mm,
I'm not saying that that happened with Star Wars. I'll definitely watch Star Wars, or I'll definitely continue watching Star Wars,
mm.
and also new stuff they put out. Like for example, The Mandalorian now is great, I think.
Yep.
So they've got good and bad parts of, or yeah, good and bad ways of continuing the Star Wars series as a thing.
Mm,
Um, just with movies like, for example, John Wick, they are well made and well received.
mm,
But if they weren't, I think the movie makers need to realize that there's a well, when the time comes not to make another movie.
yes.
Um, and I think I don't really have an example for it right now, but
Yeah. But a general feeling
often they
that
just
this is
try
not,
too
yeah,
much.
yeah, that is not considered that actually stopping could be something, or like bringing it to a conclusion where it makes sense is a good way of ending things.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it for movie sequels. I think these were some interesting ways and different opinions and good examples of having different sequels and different opinions on whether they are successful or not and are good or bad, at least to say from our point of view.
Yeah.
And I hope you are there for the next time. Goodbye.
Goodbye.